Hello, everybody. This is Fiona Timms, author of White Zulu, and we are now on book 3. This is chapter 3, my second wedding and married life in Stanger. I'm sorry about the outside noise. Somebody's got a weed whacker and he's trimming the edges of the lawn. Apparently spring is coming. I don't believe it myself because we've got snow forecast. But however, he's going to be annoyingly noisy. We just have to put up with it. He will go away eventually. My wedding was to be in the Michaelhouse Chapel, or rather in the much smaller crypt, an underground room or vault beneath the church, used as a chapel, as it would be family only. And because I was a widow, we were allowed to marry in a church. Being under the chapel, the crypt was rather gloomy and dark. My sister-in-law-to-be, Mary, made me a wedding dress, a tasteful affair, which didn't look much like a wedding dress, but more like a long-sleeved voortrekker nightdress. I wasn't particularly interested in what I wore, as my heart wasn't in it. Dad had paid for and organized for a small reception at Rawdons Hotel nearby, and the ceremony was brief and minimalistic. Alistair walked up the aisle in front of me, now aged 2.5 years old, dressed in his very best. He had golden curls, big blue eyes, and carried a small posy of bluebells, and I followed on Dad's arm. Before I knew it, we were on our way to the Cape on our honeymoon. We sailed from Durban, having put our car onto the Windsor Castle mail ship. This was one of the very few remaining liners which took all the mail and cargo from Southampton to Durban via Cape Town, and was eventually replaced by South African Airways. Sadly, those beautiful mail ships were finally discontinued, as has South African Airways. One instant which did alarm me was during the voyage, after the ship's formal ball between Port Elizabeth and Cape Town, I woke up in our cabin to find Tom, stark naked, fumbling his way out of the cabin door and into the passageway. I jumped up and steered him towards the loo, which he was trying to find. And when I asked him about it the following morning, he had absolutely no recollection of getting out of bed at all, let alone wandering out of the cabin without a stitch on. Tom was a type 1 diabetic and had to inject himself with insulin every morning and was not supposed to drink at all. Never mind lager, which is full of carbohydrates. But that had never fazed him, and I only found out about the insulin when I found it on the windowsill in our bathroom weeks later, sitting in the sun and turning to an opaque jelly-like substance. Insulin is supposed to be kept in the fridge. Tom's method of managing this disease was to have a substantial amount of lager at night and then increase his insulin in the mornings to counteract the hangover and effects of insulin deficiency. We spent 2 weeks touring around the Cape and its surrounding areas, and also staying with relatives of Tom's. We spent a week at one of his cousins' beach houses in Gordon's Bay, where the wind blew furiously for 3 days. We also went to visit my mother's family home, now owned by the Clutie family, her cousin, and which has been turned into a boutique hotel. It was fascinating to see where my grandmother's mother had scratched her name in one of the pieces of glass on the dining room window pane with their enormous diamond rings. Her 3 sisters had done the same, and the etchings were still there. The slave bell is still there, and the entire beautiful Cape Dutch mansion, surrounded by vineyards, tended to by my ancestors and those of the same Malaysian slaves who had worked in the vineyards and responded to that same slave bell. You can Google Alphen in Groot Constantia and find photographs of it now that it's a hotel. We came back to Pietermaritzburg on the Drakensberg Express, a beautiful luxury train, very similar to the Blue Train, which takes, or rather took, tourists from Cape Town to Johannesburg via Pietermaritzburg, where we disembarked. We drove up to collect Alistair from the farm, and then to Stanger, where we moved into a bank flat. This was in a small block in the centre of Stanger and supplied by Barclays Bank. Stanger is an inland town populated entirely by Indians. It's in a hollow between the sea and the hills behind, and therefore any sort of cooling breeze blows directly overhead and misses the town completely, leaving it a stifling high humidity and extremely hot place. It was an incredibly noisy town as well, and our ground floor flat, 2-bedroom, was right next to the mosque from where the Muezzin calls on Muslims to pray 5 times a day at sunrise, noon, mid-afternoon, sunset, and nightfall, using a very efficient loudspeaker system, and started at 6:21 in the morning. It was also right in the middle of the business district, where the mostly Indian townspeople had their shops, all of which had displays of curry powders and spices, along with vegetables all laid out in the baking summer sun. On the other sides of our flats was a bakery, which gave off the sweet smell of fresh bread and cakes from dawn till dusk. My possessions had already come over from Scotland and had been moved up from my flat in Durban. Our first day, a Monday, I tried to amuse Alistair while I unpacked and prepared a special meal, the first one we would share as a married couple. 5 o'clock was when I was expecting Tom back, as his bank closed their doors at 4:30 in the afternoon so they could cash up for the day. I had bathed Alistair and dressed him in his pajamas to spend time with his new dad before his bedtime. Then I took out a couple of crystal champagne glasses, wedding presents, and had a half bottle of good wine chilling in the fridge. After bathing, I changed out of the shorts I'd been working in all day, an intra-cool dress, and sat at the window to wait for Tom to come home. And waited. 6 o'clock came and went, and I rang the bank, but there was no answer. Alistair was now ready for bed, and as it had been a long day, so I put him to bed and went back to sit with a book and wait. At 8 o'clock I had some of the supper, which had been sitting in the warming drawer of the stove, and then turned it off. When it got to 10 o'clock, I was ready for bed, when Tom came home. He flung the front door open with a crash and stood there swaying. He was clearly as drunk as a lord and could barely speak. When I began to ask him where he'd been all this time, he staggered past me and collapsed on the bed where he passed out, still with his shoes on. I was speechless and horrified. He hadn't warned me that he would be home late. In fact, had promised to come straight home once he'd cashed up, and we would spend the evening together. That was why I'd gone to so much trouble to make our first night so special. There was no more to be said as he was snoring deeply and dead to the world. I would have to tackle him in the morning. Sorry, things are going funny here. Sorry, folks. I seem to have reached the end of my reading. I'm going to leave it there. I can't find any more on this. Sorry, I found it, sorry. The next morning, I sat up to see that sometime during the night, Tom had changed into pajamas, and now he looked distinctly hungover. His alarm had gone off and he was clumsily trying to get out of bed, intending to go to work. "Where on earth were you yesterday afternoon and most of the night?" I asked him. "I was worried that something had gone wrong, or you'd been taken ill or something. But I rang the bank and there was no reply. So you can't have been there." "Oh, I rang to tell you I'd be having a couple of drinks in the bank bar after work, but there was no answer. You must have been out or something." This was a very unlikely story, as I hadn't put my foot out of the flat the entire day. "No, I was here the whole day I was here the whole day, but the phone didn't ring once. I even picked it up now and again to check if there was a dial tone. The phone is fine. There's nothing wrong with it." He mumbled something and began his daily ritual of injecting himself with insulin. He had been a type A diabetic since the age of 18 and made a lot about having to have his meals on time in case he had a sugar imbalance and became hyperglycemic. I had understood all of this, but he seemed to be able to enjoy several castle lagers at lunchtime and even more in the evening as long as I'd known him. All the time we had spent together. It had been a weekend or we were on honeymoon. So I thought he was giving himself an extra treat and taking himself off the leash, eschewing the right diet and routine he claimed to be had been following since he was 18 and contracted diabetes. Now I expected him to revert to normal and just have the odd beer at weekends and eat properly. I'd even gone so far as to choose dishes designed for diabetics, those with reduced carbohydrates. Tom didn't have breakfast, something I'd been prepared to make for him, but said he would get something at work, and off he went. Just before he walked out of the door, I called to him and said, "You'll be at home by 5 then?" And he nodded and waved goodbye. He'd only had a momentary glimpse of Alistair, who had toddled into our room and climbed into my side of the bed to look at a picture book quietly, until his new daddy, as he called him now, as he had begun to speak, came too. That is all for this time. I want to thank you all for listening. I hope you're enjoying it. If you want more information, not only on these 3 books, but on my other 5 works, please go to my website. It's www.whitezulu.com, and you will find plenty of photos and more information on my life there. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you too to John for helping me upload this video, and Sean as well. Thank you and goodbye.